Hello, everybody. This is the Open Lab Seminar on May 2, 2022, Cultural Data Analytics Lab in Tallinn. We are very, very honored to have a special guest today, which is Quinn Dombrowski from Stanford University, where she is academic technology specialist in the division of literatures, cultures, and languages. And she will talk about coding, childcare, and badly behaved tools, adventures in multilingual data setting. The stage is yours. We have 2 hours, so you can use it however you want, either talk for 2 hours or talk for 10 minutes, discuss it out for the rest. So
I think I'll go somewhere in the middle here. We'll see. We'll see how long it goes. All right, let me get the screen sharing going here. All right. Okay, yeah, thank you so much for having me at such a late hour. Time zones are indeed challenging, and I feel especially bad, sort of given the ongoing theme of childcare and caregiving responsibilities, to be inflicting on you something so late into the evening that I myself would not be able to make word at that time in my own time zone. So with apologies and gratitude, here's what I have for today. So let's start at the beginning here. This was me as, I don't know, maybe a 4-year-old. As a small child, I was meant to be raised bilingual, German and English. My mother was raised bilingual, and she thought, well, you're good enough for me. I'll do the same. Her mother immigrated from Austria after the war. When her GI father made fun of her mother for the size of her ice skates, because American shoe sizes are obviously on a different scale, and for whatever reason she decided, this is the guy I'm going to marry, and so the rest was history. So Saturdays I went to German school, and that was me there looking serious in the corner. And I really loved languages, and I loved learning languages and learning different ways to say things, also because I could then say things back to the bullies and I wouldn't get in trouble. So when I was 3, my sister was adopted from Korea, Sumi, and as a teenager, as many teenagers of the era were, I got really into anime and manga and Sailor Moon, and decided to teach myself Japanese, using things that I could find online. In high school and middle school, I took Spanish, and then when I was 15, I spent a summer as an exchange student in Argentina. And then I ran out of Spanish classes in high school, but still liked languages, and ended up, deciding that that looked like an interesting alphabet there on the wall. I'll take Russian, sure, why not? And within a year, I had sort of spent enough hours, learning all about the joyful world of declension, that I was able to participate in a regional Olympiada of spoken Russian, on a trip to Russia as a high schooler, really bless those teachers who were, wrangling 20 high school students through Russia in, 2000. And sort of that's how it continued. When I was going off to college, these are the very serious, sincere high school graduation portraits that one does in the US, sort of reflecting all of one's loves and interests, as it is done. And mine was all about the languages that I cared about. There was the Argentinian mate, there was the Japanese porcelain cat, and the Russian nesting doll. And in going to college, I thought I was basically done with Russian. I was going to learn Japanese and focus on that from then on. But then I sort of got ahead of myself, tripped over kanji, and decided that I needed to go back to something that I was a little bit more competent with. So I ended up majoring in Slavic Linguistics. I got both a bachelor's and a master's in that at the University of Chicago. And then I also managed to tip my hand to the Slavic department that I knew computers, which was very exciting at the time. The website for the University of Chicago Slavic department was like a super embarrassing monstrosity. It literally had bouncing Russian nesting dolls as a major design element, and I just died inside every time I saw it. And I went to the department chair and I'm like, look, you don't even have to pay me. Enough payment is like not hurting my eyeballs whenever I look at your website. Let me redesign the thing. And so this is how they got the idea that like I know a thing or two about computers. So when a faculty member, Daniela Hristova, got a grant to do a database of East Slavic texts and documents, she's like, okay, Quinn knows things about computers. Quinn will be our tech person. And this other undergrad from the same year was going to be the guy who was going to do the OCR correction on the text. And as it happens, I ended up marrying him not that many years afterwards. And now we have 3 kids. We'll get back to this medieval East Slavic project later on. All right, so I started a PhD program. I quit a month later. I realized that I was more interested in how people do research and helping them do that research better than actually like finding one super niche topic in Slavic linguistics and spending the next 5+ years of my life doing that thing. Conveniently though, I had worked in a computer lab as an undergrad, and I had once answered a survey that the head of the academic technology department put out, wanting to know about like, what is the technology use a day in the life of an undergrad student? And it turned out I was the only person who answered this survey. And so somewhat dubiously, he made a whole presentation off of a data point of 1. But nonetheless, he was eternally grateful that he was able to fulfill the terms of the abstract that he had submitted to this fancy conference. And so when I was planning on dropping out of grad school, he's like, I will make you a job. Notable here, this was 2007, precisely 2007, and had I quit a year later, obviously with the world financial crisis, this would not have been possible. So very, very good luck there in terms of timing. I got sucked into this Mellon-funded cyber infrastructure extravaganza called Project Bamboo, where the Mellon Foundation decided that digital humanities was going to be a thing. Okay, cool. But instead of talking to digital humanists about what they wanted or needed, they listened to some heads of university IT who decided that like a shared services platform was the answer that everyone needed. All of these digital humanities tools that people were making needed to be refactored as services, and they needed to be put on a platform to be able to be scaled to, across the globe. And, $1 million was poured into this listening tour where we went around and basically like heard people tell us that we were wrong. And then we went off to build the thing that no one wanted. So I was sort of the most junior person on the team, also the resident comedian, sort of refactoring our Project Bamboo logo and sort of mashing it up with Survivor to create this thing here. Also transcribing posters and doing all kinds of other, clerical work, data organization, making the wiki and things like that. So I ended up moving from University of Chicago to UC Berkeley after there was some upheaval in Chicago IT. I moved to Berkeley in August and to work on Project Bamboo, and Bamboo was defunded in December. So that was bad news. But happily, they realized that they could still use me. They had spent so many years trying to build shared services infrastructure that they hadn't actually talked to anyone on campus to see what was going on with digital humanities or what people wanted to see. So I embarked on a bit of a listening tour more locally to see kind of what the local faculty needs were. And this was great for a little while until the person who was running the nascent DH program decided that it would be cheaper to just have grad students, do the digital humanities technical consulting. You don't actually need staff for that. You could just have a rotating cast of grad students who you bring in, use for a semester or two, and then, throw out. Let's just get rid of the staff. And so my position was defunded. And that's how I landed in high performance computing. Which is sort of interesting because at that point I functionally did not know how to code at all. But what I was really good at was writing polite emails, which you would think would be a pretty general skill that would not be, so highly sought out. But it turns out in the world of high performance computing support, this actually was a major thing that I could do that few people could. The system that we had going at Berkeley was this: the faculty would write in irate because something was broken. The HPC, sysadmins would, send them 3 words of a response and they would feel that they had answered the question, the faculty would feel that the HPC people had blown them off. The HPC people were used to dealing with astrophysicists, where a 3-word email is like the height of like respect for other people's time. And so when they started supporting people in the humanities and social sciences and even the biological sciences, they were just baffled why their like, you know, support ticket review ratings like suddenly like went into the toilet. So my superpower here was we would get the angry emails. I would write a polite note back. I would write a polite note to the sysadmins, who would then send me 3 words in response, which I would translate into a polite note back to the faculty, and around it would go with everyone yelling at me all day long. Which, you know, was okay insofar as I was employed, which is useful when you have at that point 2 and you know, soon to be 3 small children, but it was really a kind of miserable way to live. So happily, you know, my plan was to maybe like continue with the HPC, maybe try to like move into a different position with less support role. I gave a talk at the University of Alberta called The Benefits of Failure. That was supposed to be like my great swan song for DH. This is going to be like my final statement on all things DH while I like moved on with my life. But instead, a position came open at Stanford that managed to sort of bring together everything that I had ever loved in my work life. You know, the languages, the digital humanities, the libraries, all in this sort of strange position called academic technology specialist. No one really knows what I do. I often get emails asking for the copier code, which for the record, I don't know. I get asked to like fix projectors or like deal with Canvas or learning management systems. I mean, basically what it amounts to is a digital humanities staff support role. Anything that is broadly defined digital humanities, short of like making and maintaining faculty's personal websites, we got to draw a line somewhere, and like that's it. You know, anything besides that is my job, and I really love it. So it's funny. You know, I am in this division of literatures, cultures, and languages, which, as I often have to explain, is all of the literatures, cultures, and languages except for English, East Asian, and classics. English because it's too big, East Asian because it broke off, and classics because it's just kind of it's doing its own thing. So like literally, it is my job to do non-English DH. But I find it, you know, incredible how often I have to justify this in a way that, you know, no one walks up to someone in the English department and are like, why are you studying English literature? Why are you doing English DH? Why is all of your DH work in English? Like I'm pretty sure that no one ever gets asked that question. But I have literally gotten this question not infrequently about the work that I do, and even suggesting that this must be some kind of like trauma response to someone who, you know, was mean to me in an intro to DH class. Am I doing this to like get back at the system? And like I mean it's baffling, you know, the degree to which like people don't think of language as you know, a meaningful axis of diversity, you know, much like many other things that we, you know, if someone says, you know, why are you working on like Latino DH or Black DH, like there isn't the same kind of interrogation. But, you know, this is still, I mean, the attitude about languages, which happily does seem to be shifting in the US, but there's still a degree to which it's kind of still off the radar. So infrastructure. After my work on Project Bamboo, during my interview for my current position, the head of the library was very firm that like, you are not supposed to build infrastructure. Whatever you do, this is not Project Bamboo. You are not going to be building infrastructure. You're supporting faculty in what they need. So on one hand, I have not built any infrastructure of the nature that we were discussing with Project Bamboo. You know, like these services roadmaps and you know, variety, ubiquity, cloud deployments, common services, marketplace. Like this is definitely not what I have been doing. You know, of course, to the delight of the head of the library. But there is still a lot of infrastructure that I have been working on in this position. And I mean, like, honestly, I feel like some of the most valuable work that I have done has been building infrastructure. But this infrastructure are the kinds of things that people take for granted in English. Things like corpora. Like, you can't do computational DH work without corpora. And if you're working in English, odds are a lot of the things that you want, you can just buy. Like there are vendors who are happy to take large sums of your money and hand you very nicely cleaned up, OCR'd, corrected metadata rich corpora. So you can just like buy your way out of like all of the time and effort that goes into building these corpora. If you're working in other languages, like this is literally not possible. There is no sum of money that you can hand over to the large content vendors to get the corpora that you need. Also corpora formatted in convenient ways for DH. There's so much text cleaning and preparation and metadata. Decent metadata is a beautiful thing, and really the only way to get there with the kinds of languages and text that I work with is doing it yourself. Certainly forget about vendor TDM platforms that are now being pushed on libraries, and libraries are being encouraged to at least consider offering support for, like, you can't find the stuff that people want to work with in the languages that my department supports. So, tough luck. Things like having your writing system reliably show up correctly. We don't really think about this as infrastructure, but like Unicode is absolutely like a key standard that like underpins, so much of the DH work. It's not exciting in the way that, things related to content are, but like if you can't read it because the script has been mangled, it's a non-starter. Decent OCR options. So luckily in my department, it's mostly Latin and Cyrillic script, but we do have Arabic. And, while there have been significant advances in Arabic script OCR, it's still absolutely a work in progress. Devanagari is still a work in progress. Hebrew could be better. It's getting there. But these are things that, like, again, English, English oriented, scholars tend to take for granted. Handwritten text recognition is another axis that, where things are evolving quickly. But once again, I mean, there are models for some languages, there are many models for some languages and none for others. And it takes time and effort to get there. Visualization tools that display your language correctly. Don't get the poor Arabic people started on Gephi. I think they've finally fixed it, but like for years you could not do a network that had Arabic language text in it because just everything would break terribly. Similarly, graphic user interface based tools that won't choke when they encounter your language as it's usually written. And so this gets into issues of text pre-processing, text separation for things like Chinese segmentation, for Chinese, Japanese, Arabic. You have to artificially insert spaces, making the text look kind of weird because that's not how it's usually written in order for it to work with these tools. Similarly, tutorials that work out of the box. One of the things that I've been, sort of like banging a gong on about, when it comes to pedagogy is, how much of, text analysis in particular, pedagogy assumes that you're working with English. And okay, so maybe the class needs to work through English language materials just to have a common base to go through the exercise. But if you don't tell the people who want to apply this to other languages that it's not going to work, as it worked for English, if you try to throw Spanish at it, or Dutch or Arabic or Japanese, they're just going to have a miserable time once the class is over and won't understand why they took this class that isn't going to work with their language. Again, workshops with materials that you can apply to your own text. Similarly, if you're not aware of the fact that other languages work differently and other languages will make these tools and tutorials break, then you're really disadvantaging your students who work with those languages. NLP tools that work on your language. We'll get back to this, the Babysitters Club, but it has been fascinating at how bad the NLP models have been, even for widely used Western European languages. And if it's behaving that badly for French, don't get me started about what the situation is for smaller languages with fewer speakers and fewer resources to develop these models. Yes, having them work well is a challenge. And finally, having instructors who work on the same language as you. It's not something that we think about, but when you walk into an intro to DH class or a workshop, how often do you assume that the person teaching the class understands how the language that you want to work with works? We don't think about it with English, but it's absolutely a factor. And having even an instructor who has some sense that language matters a lot for this work is not something that you can take for granted in this space. Let alone peer reviewers who know anything about it, and the challenges of getting your work published, assuming you're able to get to the point of finishing something, having that work published in a way that recognizes the contributions of the work. Like even if it's something that like would be fairly boring and prosaic in English, it may be, a masterful feat to be able to accomplish it in another language. And this is sort of another, blind spot that peer reviewers often have. All right, so chapter 3, I guess maybe it is. In 2019, I went to Vegas. This was terribly exciting because it was the first vacation I'd had in about 4 years. So my husband and I went, and the in-laws took care of the kids, and we just left them, not at the pizza shop. We got them back home safely, but then we caught a plane, flew off to Vegas, and my husband made me promise that I would not work all week. I'm like, okay, I can do this, no problem. While we were, walking around Vegas, enjoying some of these miraculous creations where you can like eat and drink beer through a straw all in the same contraption, I had an inspired idea. I remembered a children's book series that I grew up reading. This is me, age 7 or so, called the Babysitters Club. And on the justification that since my work is non-English DH, what I can do to not work this week is to do English. This is gonna be my vacation. I'm gonna do stuff in English. It's gonna be easy. It's gonna be fun. And I decided that it would be fun to build this corpus of the Babysitters Club books, and then see what we could do with them with computational text analysis. So I started working on it, and I started tweeting about it, as one does. I mean, knock on wood that the Elon Musk deal falls through, and there are lots of things that one can say about the downsides of running one's social life through these commercial media platforms, but nonetheless, this is how I managed to find some collaborators. And a couple months later, we launched the Babysitters Club. So it's me, Katja Bowers, Anouk Lang, Elise Gallert-Bassett, Maria Ciceri, and Rupika Rizm, and we go through this corpus of beloved 80s and 90s girls books and try out a bunch of computational methods and write about it. And not only write about the results, but we also write through the process. And part of the process is our feelings about the process. It's not just about the code, it's also about how mad we get at the code, or how frustrating it is to dig all the way into like the word list and see what sort of like ridiculous nonsense this thing is doing. And so we've been writing these books ever since. It was Rupsi's great idea that we basically write each book based on whatever the next book in the original series is. So the first one had to be Quinn's great idea. The second one was Katja and the Phantom Corpus. And so on. And so this is our constraint. Whatever we want to write about, we have to fit it into some spin-off of the title of the next book in the series. And I make these little covers. So that was a fun week, but I wanted to bring the vacation home. I was having so much fun, and I wanted to continue doing things with these collaborators, that I needed to find some way to make this not just a vacation project, but also fit into the broader scheme of the things I work on. Which is how the Multilingual Mystery sub-series launched. Originally with me and Lee looking at the French. French turned out to be a very fortunate choice, although it was not what I was originally going for. I had never taken French. I don't speak French. I mean, I can work with French as data. I mean, it's a Romance language. How hard can it be? It turned, I wanted to work on Spanish. The problem was that Lee was into French, so we did French. And it turns out that French is fascinating because French, as far as we can tell, has the most translations that were done separately, or were they separate? This is an adventure we'll get to later. In general, non-prestige translation is just a incredibly fascinating world, and it's understudied, and it's hard to find, and it's underappreciated. There's definitely work on DH and like literary translation, But we found far less, in DH or outside of DH on work in, very much like non-prestige, like throwaway, like translation for children, done rapidly, probably not that well paid, certainly not even credited in a lot of cases with the translator. But we've made some pretty amazing finds. So with, one of my pandemic hobbies, sort of consumerism as a salve on the state of the world, was buying these books. So I ordered these books from around the world. Sometimes shipping was prohibitively expensive. So I would find friends in different countries to bribe in various ways to be like my book mules. They would sort of amass all these packages of like pink books showing up to their house and then put them in a box and mail them to me. And I would, in reciprocity, send American treats. Like my colleague Javi de la Rosa was my Spanish book mule, and he got a bunch of Trader Joe's heart cookies and like drink mixes that he couldn't find in Spain. So, speaking of snacks, one of my favorite projects that we did with this was last summer, where we looked at the localization and sort of transformation of brand names. The Babysitters Club is somewhat unusual, as we've found with our larger corpus of YA books. It's unusual in how many brand names they mention. Like brand names of food are everywhere. Like they're not into like fashion brands. It's all about the snacks. And so what we were curious about was like in the 80s and 90s, like what did they do with this? Like some of these are like very much American brands that like don't exist in other places. Like what are the translators doing? And so what we ended up doing was we used Blue Align, which is a text alignment algorithm for translations, where you take the original text, you take the human translation, and then you do a machine translation between them. And then the machine translation basically is used to triangulate between the original and the human translation. And what it can do is it can align things sentence by sentence. So we then transformed our English text and our translations into these like sort of sentence by sentence lineups. And then we ended up using WordNet to identify like American brand names and also just food words in general. And then, we did a manual pass to catch anything that WordNet hadn't tagged as food. So we were able to then get a set of sentences aligned with their translations that had been tagged in English as having a food. And then we looked at what happened to the food in the other language. So sometimes they localized the brand names and found more or less equivalent brand names, from the country to sort of swap in. Other times they went for like sort of similar food items where there wasn't like a one-to-one correspondence, but like this is sort of broadly the same kind of thing. And then this was an interesting one. I think there was only like one or two translators that like went for this approach. They went for things that sounded the same, like where it's a similar sounding brand name, even if the food item is totally different. So Doritos, a corn chip, turned into Bonitos, which is a chocolate thing, because they sound similar. And Rice Krispies became Cosimil, and Pop-Tarts became popcorn, which very, very different foodstuffs there, but they both involve the word pop, so okay. Then there's the effort that happened a lot, we saw, of replacing brands with generic food names. So, Jell-O can become this like compote. We have a lot of like, chocolates or candies rather than these, specific brand names. And then sometimes the translators like really were not getting paid enough to deal with this. And they just deleted the food. They're like, whatever, we'll just align it and not deal with this whole mess. My favorite though is where they localize the food preferences, going from like kind of like your weird, gross American school lunch to like a much more tasty and nutritious sounding plate of food. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches become like these like nice ham sandwiches. So it's nice imagining the characters upgrade in their school food options. And so this is where we realized that something was up as we were going through and tagging the Belgian translation and the French translation, which we had assumed were like completely different. We realized that there were some similarities. At a glance, the Belgian translation would seem to be like a very different thing from the French translation. The Belgian translation like hyper localized everything. Everything was like the girls were moved to a suburb of Paris. Interesting, Paris specifically, but yes, like they moved to the suburb of Paris. They changed all of their names to give them French names. All the food stuff tended to be localized. And so we thought that like this is one translation. And then the French one, which came out a good deal later, took a very different strategy. It was still set in the US. All the girls had the same names. We're like, okay, this must be like, they must have translated it just completely anew in France. But what we discovered through this process and looking at the foods was that there was the Belgian translation served as like a source for the French translation. Someone went through and made some changes. They sort of unlocalized it. They changed some of the language, but the French translation is very clearly derived from the Belgian translation. And you know, by looking at these, we can see sort of like how the you know, Belgian food localization changes impacted the French one. So we have the English here where they're talking about Doritos, and in one of the books, the translator decided to go for bonitos because it sounded the same. And then when the French adapter unlocalized the Belgian translation, they saw bonitos and thought, oh, these are M&Ms. Even though the original said Doritos. There's no way you can get to M&Ms from Doritos, but if you look at it sort of via the Belgian intermediary, we were able to find this, which was just super cool. And this also helped us kind of re-credit the Belgian translators, because the Belgian publisher did not generally credit the translators for most of the books, but the French one did. And it was always the local, like sort of the French adapter's name and someone else. And we sort of followed this back and managed to align the someone else with you know, the source of the original Belgian translation. So this is what we have as a quantitative look at the different translation approaches. And you know, you can see on the top row, the Belgian strategies, you know, often really differ from the French strategies. And what we see here, we think, is sort of the impact of this adapter person who went and took the Belgian translations and then made them into the French translations. And so we see how the kind of translation approaches for foodstuffs shifts between the Belgian and the French. And so, you know, while this is kind of like a niche thing and probably not something that comes up in the majority of translation cases, you know, we sort of propose that there may be a translator signal of sorts that comes from food localization, at least in low prestige translations, where you can see that, like, you know, different translators have different preferences and inclinations in terms of how they tend to deal with this stuff. So that was a lot of fun. You know, with these translations, there's a question of, you know, are we actually reading the same book when we read it in these different translations and adaptations? Recently, sort of building on the nostalgia, as, you know, people who read the Babysitters Club as children suddenly become parents and like have their own kids and want to read these books with their kids. There's been republications, there's even graphic novel adaptions of these books. And we see in the different versions of these graphic novels, you know, little changes to the text and little changes to the images. Things like, you know, an American Chinese takeout box. In Quebec, of course, like, you know, the text has to be in French for it to be legitimate. And in France, again, they just like didn't want to deal with you know, this whole thing and remove the text altogether. So if you look at how these graphic novels were made, and these are sort of just, you know, pages made available in the English translation, they talk about how they literally like lifted the dialogue from the books. And I mean, this is important because it contributes to the sense of nostalgia on the point of the parents who, you know, probably read some of these books over and over and over again and remember some of these lines, you know, sort of in the echoes of their mind. And so this text here is literally like lifted directly from the first Babysitters Club book. You know, where you know, Christy, can you conduct yourself with a bit more decorum? And the word decorum becomes this plot point throughout the rest of the book, where she has to write an essay on like what decorum means. But if you look at the graphic novel versus the French translated texts, there's a lot of changes. It's not the same text. It's not the same dialogue. In this case, decorum is the same, but that's not the case in all of the translations even. So the kind of impact of the nostalgia for the parents is greatly attenuated in these graphic novels, because they ended up basically translating the English graphic novels into French, creating yet another sort of branching translation here. And then, you know, for the reader who grew up with the French version, again, there's, you know, tact was the word that was the plot point, and they were the thing that people wrote, you know, she wrote this essay about, where in the graphic novel is once again decorum. All right, so on to NER, and named entity recognition and NLP tools, and why this can be such a mess for things that are not English, even widely supported, you know, major world languages such as French. One of our books we went through and tried to pull out, we tried to do an identity recognition on, you know, the English and then the French translation of that book. So these are what it got for people, which, you know, this is not too bad. Locations, this is getting a little bit dicier. We do have things like Nouville, which is the town that they are living in, Oakley, but we also have Black people and white people and people's names. And once you get into miscellaneous, it is very miscellaneous indeed. You know, this is lots of names, and, you know, merci is on this list. You really, like, the more you look at it, the more your head hurts. If we look at the English by comparison, again, you know, person, it gets quite well. Geopolitical entity, which is their equivalent for place, you know, actually is not that great either. It does get, you know, Stony Brook and Massachusetts, but again, like, lots of names are showing up here. A brat gets listed as a geopolitical entity, which I'm not sure about that one. And organization, this is one that amused me. Like, some of these kind of work, maybe there's the name of an opera, but, you know, I was amused particularly by the fact that, you know, mama is an organization and dad was a person. And I feel like that is actually, like, that captures something inadvertently. And once you get into the more niche NER categories, even in English, kind of all bets are off. You know, The Witch Next Door is a work of art. Opening Night, Hey Marianne, these are not works of art that I am all that familiar with. I think my favorite though was Nope. Nope as a work of art. You know, Nope. No. So yeah, NER, dodgy in all languages, including English, perhaps even dodgier in you know, languages that are not English. And once you get into sort of the finer grained distinctions of, like, what kind of entity is it, basically all bets are off. So another thing that we've been exploring that we haven't actually done yet, this is a preview of a yet to be published Babysitters Club book, a multilingual mystery, where we tried to look at character verbs. And this came from some inspiration from a project I was working on Star Wars, where the thought I had was, if we you know, do NLP on all of the Star Wars novels, and then look at all of the verbs where the subject is one of these major characters, will we see anything interesting? And so, yeah, we you know, did TF-IDF on all of the verbs associated with each of these major characters, and then got these lists. These are the top results for TF-IDF for the characters for their verbs. And actually it works, like, quite well. You know, Yoda, it's always like pedagogy, you know, Yoda taught, Yoda says, Yoda knows, Yoda warned, you know, Vader rumbled and strode and ordered and killed, Jabba boomed and rubbled and chuckled and things like that. I love that both Emperor and Palpatine died. Like, really their major function in the novels going forward is that he's dead. He died, and, you know, there you go. So then I, you know, took those and sort of a bunch of other characters and tried to do a heat map on this, looking at the similarity between them. And so we see, you know, there's this sort of a general mishmash of, you know, the characters and their verbs. You know, the you know, Lando and, like, Leia have a lot in common sometimes. But we have these sort of characters or entities that are really distinct. The Force is very different from the other characters. It guides, it flows, it works, it protects. The Wookiee characters are also really different from everything else, but very similar to one another because they don't speak. They growl and roar and bark and things like that. And 3PO is also like actually very distinct compared to, you know, the other characters, you know, translated, cried, reported, exclaimed, and things like that. So I thought, what if we do this for the Babysitters Club? Will we get anything interesting if we see, you know, what are each of the characters doing? Do the characters, you know, from the reader's perspective, these characters are all very distinct. But, you know, like, can we see, are the characters doing different things? So I tried this and I ran the English books through and looked to see how many verbs are governed by the character name. And so some of these patterns are to be expected. These books are narrated in the first person, and I was just looking like literally for like governed by like the character name. I wasn't trying to do a co-reference resolution to get all the pronouns. So Christy narrates book 1, which makes sense that she would not be governing a lot of verbs there. You know, Marianne is book 4, you know, Claudia is book 2. This is fine. But if we start looking at the you know, delta between what we get running through the English through Spacey NLP versus any of the French, it's really horrifying, the data loss. We are getting so many fewer sentences in French. These are translations of the exact same books than we got out of the English, you know, which sort of led me to wonder, like, is this project even viable, you know, for languages other than English, just given how, like, what loss we're getting in terms of, like, we know there are more sentences out there where these characters are the subjects, like, what's happening with them? So I made Spacey show its work. I made it display some sentences that had these characters in them. This is the sentence. So Claudia ignored the question. This is how it should be parsed. And we tried it with modern French. And here, you know, they swapped out Claudia's name with a pronoun. So, you know, okay, this is a legit, you know, non-inclusion, I guess, the translation mediated loss there. But if we look at the older French translation, things are wacky. There's not a verb. It doesn't realize that that's a verb and that's a subject. So that's not good. Belgian has the exact same problem here. It's not realizing that ignorer is a verb. And in Quebecois, we like Claudia is just an adjective, like floating out there, and there's no syntactic relationship identified here. But then I got the idea, what if we, like, maybe the problem is the names. Maybe the problem is, like, these names are not, you know, close enough to names that were in the training data for the French NLP model. Maybe if we substitute it for some, like, super Frenchy names, maybe it will be able to pick things up correctly. And at least in this case, it did. Substituting Claudia for Julie, you know, correctly leads to everything being linked up and recognizing Julie as the subject. But it didn't work across the board, like, by far. So name substitution had really uneven effects. It worked best for Claudia, but, you know, we ended up, like, losing some of the character references for some of the other characters. So this wasn't the fix that I hoped it would be. And I think we haven't figured out what the conclusion for this book is yet. If you have any ideas, please let me know. But I think basically, you know, we all need to be more critical and look more closely at the data that is being used to train these NLP models that we, you know, try to use out of the box because they're promoted as being usable out of the box. But actually there's a lot, like, you know, anything from the set of names that are available to the kinds of grammatical constructions that are available. I mean, these models are trained on, you know, French newspapers, and the difference between that and, like, Quebecois, like, girls' books, you know, in terms of the language that's being used and the syntax is being used, like, it's significant, and it has a major impact on what we can do with these tools. All right, so I had some big plans for 2022. I was going to launch a computational reading list for the Slavic grad students. I was going to take their entire reading list for their comps and, you know, get digital versions of all those texts, and then have that as a corpus that they could use to sort of learn about computational methods while also supporting their preparation for the comps. I was going to build a giant corpus of Russian poetry for various different computational projects. I was going to source bestseller lists as a basis for 21st century French corpus. I've done this with a New York Times bestseller list for English. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be cool if we had multiple different kind of like countries and languages worth of bestsellers and got those books and sort of built these parallel corpora of like, what is popular literature in the 21st century across languages and space. I had a multilingual Harry Potter fanfic project going right before the pandemic. It was such a delightful thing, especially before like J.K. Rowling really went off the edge. You know, and I was going to revive that project, and we're going to do some better web scraping to sort of reanalyze all this material across an English, Italian, and Russian archives. I was going to spend a lot of time with David Bamman's new spacey-based multilingual book NLP to be able to try to resolve some of our co-reference and you know, tagging problems. I was going to launch the Young Readers Database of Literature and do cool stuff with the bigger YA corpus and the Babysitters Club. Like look at sort of what is distinctive about the Babysitters Club and sort of what is generally a trend among you know, YA literature of that time and period. I wanted to work with grad students to write a bunch of blog posts and tutorials exploring and comparing different Slavic NLP tools. And while I have become more of a Python person, you know, during the pandemic, I meant to sort of improve my R skills in context where that made sense. February 22nd, like things seem to be on track. We, you know, Nicole Nomura and I gave a talk at 2:45 a.m. For Darty. You know, talking about our Young Readers Database of Literature. It was like the soft launch for that project, sort of tracking in this visualization over the last 20 years, you know, using an even number of books per year, how often are different Asian countries mentioned in these books. You can see kind of notably the rise of Korean over the last handful of years, Chinese consistently above the rest. Japanese also kind of surprisingly high given the number of Japanese Americans in the US where most of these books are from, and Russia sort of representing pretty dramatically. So that was the plan. Things were going fine, and then Russia invaded Ukraine, and then I spent about a week doom scrolling as many people did, and pretty much doing nothing at all. And then Anna Kies, who is the music librarian at Tufts University, on the first weekend of the war, you know, tweeted about a virtual data rescue session that she was planning to focus on music collections at cultural heritage institutions in Ukraine. And, you know, I saw this tweet, as did Sebastian Majstorovic from the Austrian Center for Digital Humanities and Cultural Heritage. And he had some technical ideas for how to do this and how to do more of this. And myself, I was you know, simultaneously relieved to have something concrete to do besides doom scrolling, but also really anxious in those days. We didn't know how the war was going to go, or whether you know, kind of what would still be standing a week in the future. So I got them together along with a few other colleagues that expressed some interest in this kind of work on Monday, the last day of February, and on March 1st, Sucho launched. And, you know, we were doing everything at the same time. We were building a website, we were writing tutorials, we were making a Slack, we were, you know, creating this Google form for people to sign up. And this was really a moment where, you know, kind of all of the sort of work I put into the Babysitters Club of trying to write, you know, computational text analysis tutorials in a friendly, colloquial way, you know, translated really well to writing technical tutorials for web archiving. Which, you know, much of the computational work that we did with the Babysitters Club, I knew nothing about before we started this. Like this is a like learn everything and document it as you're doing it kind of project. I knew that the Internet Archive and the Wayback Machine were a thing and the thing you could submit links to, but beyond that, like that was the extent of my knowledge. So as I was learning everything about the somewhat complicated you know, and messy world of web archiving, and, you know, different factions and different priorities and different, you know, choices in terms of open source or closed source and commercial and non-commercial, I was writing it all down in a way to try to create a trail that the volunteers could use to be able to pick this up too. And really overall, this whole project of Sucho has been the most surreal 2 months of my life so far. You know, in the many ways in which it really feels like, if you've ever played much video games, you know how there's this dynamic where, you have to fight all these smaller bosses along the way, and then you get to the final boss, and it's a sort of complicated thing where you have to sort of use the techniques that you use throughout the entire game to finally defeat the final boss. Like this is what Sucho feels like to me, honestly. All of a sudden, all of these different threads of everything that I have worked on and done since I was a teenager, be it the Russian, be it the HTML, be it writing tutorials, trying to translate things and adapt it to different languages, trying to find things in weird corners of the internet, trying to triangulate between different, search engines, managing people, having lots of people demanding lots of things like all at the same time, and like trying to keep them all happy in Slack all at once. Like all of this all at the same time is what Sucho has been like. And yeah, I keep thinking of this sort of video game analogy. It's the best way I can describe it. By March 2nd, we had over 400 volunteers, which is just shocking. Like one or 2 days, like all of a sudden we had this Slack like full of people who wanted to help and needed guidance for how to get to the right place. And so, we helped people, and some of those people sort of stepped up to help more people. We created a group of kind of sub admins who, including Dina Strong, who spent, a week of 12-hour days in the early days, helping people find their way to tasks that they can do. By March 3rd, Sucho got emergency funding from ach.org. I didn't vote. I'm co-VP, but Rupsi and I split a vote, and I abstained. Anna's also on the board. So that was the funding that basically helped cover for the costs that Sebastian just paid out of pocket. Like Sucho started because he had the initiative to like go buy some server space and go buy a domain and just like go do this outside the scope of any organization or institution, which inevitably like moved much more slowly, but we didn't have time for that. March 4th, there was a power outage of the Internet Archive that took that entire piece of work offline for an entire morning, which normally, if it goes down, like you go get coffee, you go get lunch, you come back later, it's no big deal. But when you're dealing with a war situation, like you can't just stop all the work for a morning while Northern California power companies get their act together. And this really sort of redoubled our resolve to have a distributed system, so that someone could always be working, someone could always be archiving from their own laptop using the open source browser tricks, software and tools, rather than putting all of our eggs in the Internet Archive's basket. We work with the Internet Archive. We still send all of our links to them as well. We manually check things. We submit more links that have been really great and supportive. But I think there are many institutions that have put all of their resources towards Archivit and Internet Archive backed infrastructure, and there are risks involved with that, and I think people maybe don't think about that enough. Sucho got more funding from EADH, so again, grateful for the early support from the European Association for Digital Humanities as well. And so then there was the first weekend of Sucho where I was dealing with Git pull requests merging while pushing a swing. Props to GitHub for having a very like mobile friendly interface, so one can both approve tutorial changes and keep the local almost 4-year-old happy. So I've realized that emergency response DH is a lot like wrangling children. There are multiple things going on at multiple times in different corners. Everyone needs something. Everyone wants something. Everyone wants to show you something. And honestly, as much as there are contexts in which people feel like, having kids and having young kids is an impediment and a barrier to work. And absolutely during a pandemic, if you're trying to like do focused work while you have many small children running around you, that is difficult. But I sort of feel like it has not been without some purpose, insofar as the skills that I gained in doing all of that and sort of getting through that phase of the pandemic really were quite good preparation for managing Sucho, and managing the people and the processes and everything else. I mean, honestly, similarly with coding, I had invested a lot of work in learning to code in 2019 and the very beginning of 2020, and was really frustrated for a while that during the beginning of the pandemic, like coding was the last thing I was able to do. Like by the end of the day, I had absolutely no brain cells left to be able to like write any code or do anything, and I felt like everything was atrophying. But when I came back to it, a number of months later, like later in the summer and into the fall, I realized that, sort of the patience and the problem solving that I had been doing, in a very intensive way with the kids over that period of time, I felt like it sort of helped me level up with coding and get back to where I was and beyond faster than if I hadn't had that experience. So it honestly surprised me, but it really was the case that I think doing all of that actually ended up being like rather good preparation for where we are now. So March 16th, Browsertrix Cloud launches, and this really put web archiving in the hands of many more people. There were many people who wanted to do some of the web archiving work directly, not the metadata or some of the less technical tasks, but, literally it involved installing Docker and configuring things. And I mean, no one who's afraid of the command line really wants to touch Docker, and understandably so. But Browsertrix Cloud literally made web archiving as simple as filling out a web form. So all of a sudden we had retirees, archiving sites at scale using the cloud version of Browsertrix. And one of our volunteers even had his 6-year-old archive a site and draw a picture of what she was doing and sort of like how she saw this happening, which was amazing and inspired me to think about how we could bring more people into this project that way. And so on March 29th, I organized what may be the world's first web archiving event for children at an elementary school. With COVID restrictions still being what they are, it was held over Zoom. But we had a handful of families, show up, and we talked about, first how to talk to your kids about the war in Ukraine. We had a very moving conversation between a Ukrainian parent and a Russian parent about, like what they're each talking to their kids about and how they're explaining this and what they're doing. And then we sort of gave them an outlet to feel like they could do something and contribute in some way. The families got together and archived a bunch of sites, mostly children's libraries as it happened. Those were the sites that we had available. And so that's what they archived that night. And the work has continued through April. My own 8-year-old is a huge fan of archiving Ukrainian websites. He also knows that, I'll probably let him stay up a little bit late if he says, just 3 more sites, come on, just 3 more sites. So this has really, been amazing in terms of the people that we've been able to involve with it. Come on. So our latest, yeah, that's a spoiler of the next slide. Our new project is Digitization in Omeka, where we're trying to work with Amazon Poland that has indicated they're willing to ship digitization equipment to cultural heritage institutions in Ukraine to help them digitize more of their material. In one of the kind of many webinars that we've been a part of, there are libraries that are interested in digitizing more of their things. And so we're trying to translate digitization tutorials and get them equipment and figure out good setups based on what they want to digitize. And with Omeka, we're sort of offering this as a platform to be able to showcase those materials to the world. My colleague Yulia Ilchuk literally translated all of the remaining outstanding translation strings for Omeka. So Omeka is now available in Ukrainian. The Omeka team released an update that included this translation. And so now anyone can use it with the Ukrainian interface. And our very latest project is the meme team, where we have a group of people who are archiving memes and tracking them across a variety of sources and a variety of languages. With the thought that, we talk about cultural heritage and often what this conjures up is images of like, digitized historical documents and paintings and things in museums, but like, memes and digital culture, like this is the cultural heritage, like this is it. And this stuff is ephemeral and this stuff is often poorly preserved. And, some of the folks that we've talked to have mentioned that even though there are efforts like the National Digital Library of Ukraine, there is still somewhat of a traditional mindset over there and concerns that this stuff may not be picked up. So we are working on it. We have a team. It's still growing. If anyone wants to sign up, we still have bandwidth to take on volunteers, at least for this part of the work. To track these memes and download them and capture them with metadata for the future. So this is the part in the talk where the conclusion should go, and I don't have one. I live on one hand, there is a kind of conclusion that I would love to have and like let it come quickly. And there are other avenues that I never want to see happen. And the thing with this work, compared to everything else I've done is it's not obvious how this is going to end or when or what happens then. our goal is digital repatriation. We are not trying to create like a mega archive of Ukraine for people to study safely in the West. Like we are making these archives primarily to give back to people, you know, if they need it, if servers have been destroyed, if data has been deleted. And if they want us to keep it longer term, you know, we have organizations, including Stanford Libraries, lined up to hold on to that for the long term. But our goal is to, you know, reach out to the people who run these sites and see what we can do to support them when they're in a position to rebuild. But you know, we have to finish this war right first. And I don't know when that happens. Day of DH was sort of poignant for me because, you know, watching everyone do interesting things. And we did actually launch our Young Readers database of literature that day. But it made me miss, you know, the days when I could just do that, when I could just write tutorials for NLP stuff, when I was mostly concerned about, like, you know, why the stupid French model isn't identifying like this character is the subject of the verb. And that's not what I'm doing right now. And, you know, someday I imagine I will do it again. Already I'm trying to juggle more of my day job with this work, which has basically consumed my life for the last 2 months. But, you know, we're like, there's really no other choice. This is it. And this is what I need to be doing right now. So I don't have a conclusion, but I have some bullet points of some other things. If you want to talk about some other things, these are other things I can rattle on about all day. Yeah, the DH Rogem Adho SIG, the multilingual DH working group that's working on becoming a SIG, multilingual fanfic, stealth DH, teaching people to do DH without calling it DH, you know, in a way that empowers, you know, languages other than English for doing things like search. Looking at YA and its tropes, corpus building, copyright, anti-circumvention, and legal issues for text analysis. I also run a textile makerspace and teach people how to sew and use that as like a Trojan horse to get people into DH. Also run a virtual talk series in Animal Crossing that's been a lot of fun, and DH in labor, because that's always timely. So yeah, that's what I have for all of you this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very great. So yes, I mean, there's plenty of things to talk about. Does anybody want to start? Yes, Liz. You have to unmute though.
Great talk as always, Quinn. And you know, to see the transition from the Babysitters Club project to the current work in Ukraine is really amazing. And all of the other things that you do. And you should reach out for YA stuff to Raven Stringfield, who just successfully defended her dissertation, which has a chapter on Black YA. And
I didn't know about that chapter. I love Raven, and we've had her on Animal Crossing as a speaker, and we'll definitely have to ask her about that chapter.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, Raven Stringfield, a kind of up and coming Black DHer who's really just great. So my question has to do with the politics of DH, and obviously data rescue is can be incredibly political. You know, I think about the people who did all of the data rescue efforts for Obama web pages about climate change and LGBT issues from the Trump administration, and kind of the ways that it was often tricky to get that work funded because it was understood as being potentially politically partisan. And I think we're in a moment where people, because of the human rights abuses, people don't see the work on Ukraine as being political, even if, you know, there are obvious ways that it is. How do you feel about negotiating these questions about funding and the kind of apolitical nature of DH, supposedly,
Yeah, right.
And just kind of how are you sort of thinking about those issues about the politics of DH in light of data rescue?
Yeah, so we've bootstrapped this. So we tried pretty early on to go down kind of the usual DH funding routes for this. I mean, as you saw, we were able to like pretty quickly it hit up ACH and EADH for some funding. But that was sort of based on the fact that both of those organizations had issued sort of statements of support for Ukraine. And so it's one of those things where like we didn't start it, but they had already posted these statements. They had already sort of waded into and sort of weighed the calculus of like those political risks like by putting out those statements. And so at that point it made it very easy just to be like, cool, let's put this statement into action here. And that ended up being fine. We actually did apply for an emergency NEH grant after sort of getting the suggestion to do so. And it was rejected on two grounds. One, the legality of it, where our collaborators in Europe have gotten this more than the people in the US. I mean, I think sort of generally like different cultures and different laws, but like, are you getting explicit written permission from each of these site owners like before you archive the sites? And it's like, dude, have you seen the news? Really? I mean, like it has honestly been a struggle. I mean, we have in many cases, reached out to people in Ukraine. It is really hard to get in touch with them and stay in touch with them. Not that it doesn't happen. There was a case, one morning that I woke up to an email from a sysadmin who saw that his site was on a list of things that we had said were down, and he had gotten it back up, and could we archive it quickly, please? So it happens, but like obviously we cannot, like this is not going to work if we go get explicit written permission. So there was an appeals court ruling a number of weeks ago after we had been rejected. They basically reaffirmed the legality of scraping and archiving public web stuff in the US. So that fixed our problem a little bit too late. The other thing that we did that ended up shooting us in the foot was we mentioned, especially in the early days of the war, there was more talk about sort of a Russian cutoff from the public internet. And so sort of, and this is where the politics really come in with Sucho. To what extent, do you do this work exclusively for Ukraine? Or, to what extent are you thinking about the interests of, other people in the region, scholars in the US? I mean, obviously, there are many more scholars of Russia and Russian in the US than Ukraine, although that is quickly shifting. And so we said, basically in the interest of the scholarly community, there are sets of important archives in Russia that we want to be able to capture their websites too. And that was the other thing that shot us in the foot, because the response was, well, so you want to undermine sanctions? Which, I mean, it like wouldn't have even occurred to me that like it could be perceived that way, but that's how it was perceived. And so yeah, that's like, we have ended up, all of our major funding and support has come from tech companies, and like that is how this project has had to run. We have gotten, I mean, probably all said and done, around $30,000 worth of credits from AWS. They've recently let us know that like our current batch is the last one, so we have to migrate. We're gonna end up migrating off to like German national research infrastructure, which is probably a better long-term fit. But being able to get things done fast, like you have to work through tech companies, is what I have learned off of this. Everything else works too slowly and or with too many complications. There are too many, people have encouraged us to like write grants, and so then they send us the grant paperwork, and it's like 30 pages of like questionnaires and like anti-conflict things, whereas like Amazon will just be like, here's a pile of credits, like go do the thing. And this is something we've talked about, in general, where, emergency response efforts like have to work at a speed that like universities can't, and like institutions can't, and organizations can't and won't. And so, there's this balance of like, how do you empower people to sort of like act quickly in the beginning, sort of as the organizations are ramping up. And there comes this inflection point where, kind of people are starting to burn out, and, organizations have finally ramped up to the point of being able to support. And like, we're there right now in this transition from like the rapid response, get things going, start getting data going, to like, let's sort of move on to like a medium to longer term infrastructure. But yeah, I mean, the politics for us really are around like, what, if anything, do you do about Russia? We put the Ukrainian work, front and center as always, but there are there are sort of subgroups that we are working with that are thinking about these stuff, from a perspective of, Russian DH people. There's a large group of them who are, almost to entirely, opposed to the war. What can we do to support their work? What can we do to support the work of the archivists? Again, many of these small regional archives, what they do is I mean, they paint a different picture of Russia, a more diverse picture than the narrative coming out of the Kremlin. And like, I do think that's important. But I also am very sympathetic to the objection from, many Ukrainians that like, this is not a like them and us, it's like they're attacking us, and like, sort of the victims in this situation need to be centered in this work. So yeah, that's politics.
Thanks so much.
Mila.
Yeah, so you actually already talked about this, how you kind of like choose which websites you are actually, or kind of like this politics of kind of like where to focus. But because this is super interesting project and super valuable. So I'm just kind of like curious, could you still talk a little bit more about kind of like, as you are kind of like acting based, ad hoc, you need to work fast, and but at the same time you are doing something very valuable that is kind of like storing all these websites that can be kind of like disappeared within, I don't know, days or so. So I'm just kind of like curious, how do you actually choose the websites that you scrape and the data? So, or do you just kind of like go through whatever you find, or do you have kind of like strategies, or how do you think about this with this time pressure at the same time? So kind of like, yeah,
no, it's a great question, and the answer has sort of changed over time. We're not the only like Ukrainian web archiving group. There's also a group called Archive Team that has done basically like guerrilla archiving, I think, including these sort of like post-Trump election stuff, and they are sort of more professional, I guess, like kind of like archive and technical people, and they also leapt into action early on, and their goal was to archive everything in the .ua namespace. And one of my coworkers, Ed Summers, was in their IRC channel, because of course they run out of IRC. It's just that kind of show. So they were trying to figure out like how do you find all the websites. And so they were going to basically like work through a dictionary and try each of them. So like, English, apple.com, like bears.com, like cats.com. Is that a website? If so, we'll archive it. And all of us, over in Sucho, many of us have language skills and like domain knowledge, are just like, oh, why would you do that? Like that is an idea that like would never have occurred to us, and like maybe was the worst one that we could imagine, or at least it like sort of blew our brains a little bit. What ended up happening in the end was, a couple weeks into Sucho, we started exploring like, are there databases out there of like is like DNS like something that you can just like get a dump of? And it turns out, yes, for about $75 a month, you can subscribe to databases that like literally have like all of the things. And so that's what we did. We paid the $75 and like got a dump of like the entire .ua namespace, which we shared with Archive Team. But now we have a group of people who are parsing through those URLs to be like, which of you are going to be cultural heritage? Like, okay, the one that's like cars.com, probably not, unless it's a car museum, maybe we should check it. And trying to figure out strategies to like parcel down this, like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of records into things that seem likely to be cultural heritage. At the beginning, we were mostly working off of a form that we set up where like anyone could submit a link, and if it seemed basically in scope, we would do it. So we're trying to focus on cultural heritage, but we're defining it like super, super broadly. So things like children's after school programs, like in scope, like children's art and, dance studios, sure, all of those things count. We ended up doing a lot of universities and open access journals. We're trying to not do just like generally all the universities on the hope that someone else would take care of that. Because, you know, our process is just like more time intensive in terms of like the QA involved and like double checking things. We're really trying to like focus on cultural heritage. I think there's only been a couple things that we didn't say yes to. The other day I got an email from someone who wants basically to do Sucho for like natural resources. So, like we've done some parks, but like they wanted to do like more parks and like nature and like, you know, biological resources. So we can't take that on, but we're hoping that they, you know, might be able to work with us to do some of that. And then finally, the other way that we've been finding this stuff, I guess we did use Wikidata at one point. We looked at the links, like took a dump of all the libraries and archives and museums in Wikidata, looked for them. You will not be surprised to hear that a lot of those WordPress sites have been hacked. As WordPress sites are often like hacked and abandoned. So yeah, we found a lot of like you know, online casinos where libraries should have been. That was interesting. You know, and so we actually have had a group that like was updating those links with like new URLs or cleaning up some of that data and sort of trying to give back to Wikidata what we were able to find. But finally, we have a group doing situation monitoring that's sort of watching the air raid alerts and the on the ground sort of war, you know, hour by hour updates. And when they see that there are places that are coming under attack, we have a group of people who like, you know, manually walk through the streets digitally of these cities under siege looking for the cultural heritage icon. And then if they see it, they look at it and they go look and see if they can find a website for it. And then if so, they archive it. And so, yeah, we have people sort of getting familiar with like the street by street geography of these places on the other side of the world, looking for this stuff. But yeah, I mean, every day we keep turning up more things.
Thank you very much. I think when I saw this project the first time, it obviously made me think of other sort of epic information rescue actions. And what comes to mind is the central collecting point in Munich, where all the artworks were collected, stolen by the Nazis, and now the largest art library in the world, to give them all back. There is this other thing that was done by Fritz Zwicky at Caltech, who collected all the duplicates of scientific journals in the anticipation that all the libraries in Europe will be burned and sort of scientific journals need to be redistributed. And so he had this huge storage hall. But what these two sort of projects have in common, that they basically sort of had this like, they anticipated the future of what has been done with that. Like even the Nazis themselves had this thing where they took color photography of the ceiling frescoes, which they anticipated that they will be destroyed in all over Germany. And obviously that happened. And then there was sort of like, you know, there were very few things you could take color picture of, like basically Hitler himself and this. Like, you know, obviously this is too stretched, but not true, but it was really very precious kind of thing. But there too, obviously there was sort of like an idea to make it relive. And so obviously in the heat of the moment, as you collect all this stuff, is probably not what you think of, but this could be the restock of, like, you know, if places go down like Mariupol, where really nothing's left. This will be a very, very, very important thing to sort of like rebuild society. Have you thought about, you know, obviously if you don't, just not bad at all, but like, have you thought about like how the situation would look like? Like how would this contribute to rebuild, and do thoughts about this sort of govern of like what and how you collect?
I mean, it's funny you mentioned sort of like the anticipatory work of destruction. I mean, what the thing that we're trying to make a big point of at every opportunity, and you know, we're trying to like get UNESCO to talk about this, we're trying to get libraries to talk about this, is you know, we don't want this project to ever have to happen again, at least not in the same scale. You know, like Sucho is an inspiring story, but it's an inspiring story much like, you know, the pictures we saw early in the war of like everyone in Kyiv, you know, coming out with their beer bottles and hand sanitizer to make Molotov cocktails. Like, great story, but also points to a fundamental failure of infrastructure. Like, it should never come to this. Like, there should never be like this kind of like emergency archiving of public pages like during the war. Like, what we would like to see come out of this is some kind of international like cultural heritage network, you know, similar to how like there's this like sister city model out there where like, you know, a random place will be paired with like a random place and they'll have like cultural exchanges. What if we had that for you know, preservation of cultural heritage? Like, what if everyone like had their one job like once a year is to like back up the data from their one partner, and that way we know if a war breaks out, if a natural disaster breaks out, there is a copy of at least some of this data safe on the other side of the world. I mean, that's sort of the bigger platform that we're advocating for, to make it easier to do that rebuilding, you know, everywhere, and not just for the places that are able to get, you know, public attention. We have talked about, you know, what is it going to look like to help rebuild these things, and also how some of this data may end up being used in, you know, future war crimes tribunals. I mean, there are laws around the protection of cultural heritage, and, you know, from what we've seen about, you know, looting and destruction of libraries and museums, you know, it's possible that, you know, the things that we capture in terms of, you know, the library catalogs and like the museum holdings and even like images of galleries, you know, where you know, artwork can be seen, you know, could be used as evidence in future trials, you know, to sort of bring people to justice who have looted and destroyed things. I mean, the web archives that we have, you know, have all of the data, and they are sort of replayable, and you can interact with them as if the site were still live. That said, I mean, it's not a mirror. It's not the underpinning databases. It's not, you know, the system itself. It acts like it, but, you know, we can't give them back their original databases. We can give them back the data. But, you know, if there ends up being large scale rebuilding after this, I imagine it's going to sort of lead to maybe some fundamental shifts in infrastructure choices. For instance, the library, there's a library catalog called Irbis that I had never come across, and most of our volunteers had never heard of. But one of my grad students, Georgi Karatkov, is like, yeah, this is like a widely used like library information system in a lot of the like former Soviet countries. And he wrote a scraper to be able to actually process all of that data. And my guess is that, you know, if these servers are destroyed or aren't able to be sort of stood back up, and people need to rely on the archives that we have, you know, probably there will be a shift to, you know, more recent technologies, technologies that are sort of better known and supported in the West, if those are the groups that are going to be sort of helping these cultural heritage organizations rebuild their infrastructure.
And another question I have, like, so actually we were tasked to come up with a data management plan, and the like every large project, I guess. And so you know, what we do is analyze data, sort of, you know, write papers, publish the data with that, or publish the data in an open repository, give it back to the people who actually you know, can give stewardship beyond the duration of the project and stuff like that. But as I drew up the picture on the wall, I sort of made this snarky comment. In the end, you know, everything will be this 21-foot shipping container called the Internet Archive, which now is this data center in a box, which probably at some point will be a suitcase. So the irony is, like, even though the web gets larger and larger, the storage gets smaller and smaller. And so the question is, will there be a moment when we wear the web as a necklace, and everybody of us has one of those? And or is there somewhere in between a realistic situation? So you mentioned this kind of you know, partner cities and stuff like that, but that's true, right? Like what would happen if and this is a moment where obviously we need to think about stuff like that, because, you know, the Russians are threatening was like the big thing. Like if this ever grows beyond Ukraine, have you thought about it, or do people you're in contact with think about what that would entail. Like how do we actually get a sort of backup copy of the web?
We're working on it in particular hotspots. I mean, I think the problem with everyone having the internet on a necklace is that it's constantly changing. So like, which version of the internet do you have?
Yes. Yeah,
and the amount of data transfer that would be involved to like everyone's necklaces all the time for everyone to have the most recent backup of the internet is just kind of wild to think about. And well, I mean the Internet Archive too. I mean, you know, like what they do is amazing and invaluable, but like they're missing lots of things. They're missing, like, I mean, they have a ridiculous portion of like the Anglophone web. Like they literally have like my high school, like, you know, history and literature notes, like webpage, like from the year 2001 or whatever. But like they don't have, they never went beyond the front page on like the major Ukrainian fanfic archive, which is now down and we were not able to capture. They have the front page, but if you want to go any deeper, it's not there. So I like, this is definitely not all figured out by any stretch, although they may sort of say things that suggest that it is. I mean, I think it's a bigger problem than we give it credit for being.
Yes. Mike.
Hello. I'm sorry, unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it. I'm on vacation now, so I arrived just like 25 minutes ago and was listening not to the lecture, but to the discussion. And well, basically one thing I just wanted to say, thank you for what you are doing. And it is amazing that somebody is doing something like this right now. And another thing I thought of, just mostly motivated by what was discussed and what you mentioned like 20 minutes ago about the question of archiving Russian web. I think there is one dimension which might be important, apart from what you said, that archiving Russian web, which is to significant extent now vandalized by the state in order to achieve conformity, sort of, might be important, and some things might be lost there, although of course not on the scale of Ukraine. There might be other dimensions that actually Russian propaganda is, I think, doing exactly what is described in 1984, basically back correcting the previous records and archiving the Russian news media on the run might contain sort of smoking guns to proving certain, in particular, certain war crimes. Especially, we do know that, for example, after there was this, it was actually 8 years ago, yes, when this Dutch plane, Dutch/Malaysian plane was shut down. There was a gap of like 20 minutes between they shut it down and the moment when they recognized what they did. When there was, well, sort of celebration on the Donbass separatist networks, celebrating the fact that they have shot down a plane before they recognized that it was basically a passenger airplane, and this sort of proves that they knew what they were doing. So that is one additional dimension in which it might be important. Just, well, a passing thought.
Yeah, so the Internet Archive is like 24/7 recording, I think, 3 different Russian news TV news networks.
Mm-hmm.
There's also, I mean, news and government sites are the things that get web archived like the most and the most often by the most people, which is actually sort of why we, you know, we're trying to sort of step into a gap that you know, does not get as much attention, but, you know, especially in this war, you know, maybe particularly deserves it given kind of the position of the Kremlin that, the war fundamentally comes down to who gets to be a country, who gets to have a culture, who gets to have a language. And sort of we see that playing a particular role here in a way that, it doesn't necessarily in every war. But yeah, no, the Internet Archive is on it, and they're piling up terabytes of video and news data, every hour. So hopefully that will be of some use.
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is a super heavy topic. Mila, do you have something on that topic?
No, I'm actually
okay. I want to exactly move away from the topic. So the Babysitters Club. That's a very topic.
Let's talk about 90s girls books. That's just well. So actually, on this topic, there is a connecting thread potentially that's kind of interesting. So one of the other books that we have coming up right now that I'm still drafting is looking at a sort of knockoff series of the Babysitters Club, where the Babysitters Club is generally understood to be extremely wholesome. I mean, even conservative Christian parents would let their kids read the Babysitters Club. Okay, there are some divorced parents in there, but there's no swearing, there's no sex, there's a boyfriend, but maybe there's 5 kissing events over the course of the entire 200 book series. But it's considered very clean and appropriate. But not in all cultural contexts. So there was, in fact, a spin-off of the Babysitters Club, unofficial, but very clearly ripping off of the Babysitters Club and another series that was popular at the time called Sweet Valley Twins. That was basically wrote that kind of book for a ultra-Orthodox Jewish audience. And so there's a series of 18 books published called the BY Times that is set at a ultra orthodox Jewish girls school where they do a newspaper, but it's some of the same character archetypes and similar kinds of inter-friend conflicts, and some of the tropes are the same. And there's in both cases there's a blonde girl who comes from California and likes to eat health food, where that character is ripped off directly from a Babysitters Club character. But what's interesting, and one of the things that we want to explore more, although this won't be as much the focus of this upcoming book, is the ways in which these books kind of portray or don't portray international conflict in the state of the war. The Jewish books literally have a book called War, that is about Saddam Hussein attacking Israel, and one of the characters is over there visiting her cousins, and the house gets hit by a Scud missile, and she and the cousins survive, and she sends via fax a dispatch back to the BY Times, and that becomes a special issue of the newspaper. But it's very direct. There's an intensely pedagogical scene that tells people all about how to put on a gas mask, and how you put your chin in first in order to achieve the proper fit. Very, very very different from the Babysitters Club, where there is no discussion of politics ever. At one point they do go around the world on a European tour, and they travel across the US, but there is no politics, there are no hot button issues, there is no Persian Gulf War. All of this is outside the sort of scope and worldview of these girls, which it is actually not necessarily a bad reflection of what it was growing up middle class in the 80s and 90s. You could just sort of all this could kind of go over your head if your parents don't sort of talk to you about social issues. And so yeah, the difference in terms of what is the scope of the universe that a child knows and understands, and how does that differ across series, is one of the things that we're hoping to look at down the road.
Yes. So here's my question: this picking out a sort of nerdy topic and then throwing all the tools at it that you have, particularly in different languages, in different domains, meaning different web domains in different countries and stuff like that, obviously tells one all the stuff that doesn't work about the tools. And so one of the key questions, for anybody who's ever done this, there's this thing that we learn a lot of these kind of specific things. But the question is there something do you do you dream of scaling this? Like for example, how wrong is named entity recognition in how many countries? Can we really know that? So, and again, I'm sorry that this leads to another heavy topic, which is if you look at right-wing conspiracies, like Donald Trump and how all these people are called, Ted Cruz, Ron DeSantis in Florida, they throw out these kind of talking points. And the same talking points appear all over Europe, which people usually don't realize because they hear them in different languages. And only sometimes, like this struck me first time in, I think 2016 or so, I was in Munich, where there was a talk about Pegida demonstrations in Eastern Germany, which is this right-wing sort of like, people who like Q people basically. And they had iconographies that are fundamentally very similar or equivalent to actually iconographies you would find in right-wing circles somewhere in Southern California or Texas. And they have made absolutely zero sense in Eastern Germany, but made a lot of sense in sort of like conservative, hardcore fundamentalist Christian right-wing circles over there. And so you look at that and it's like, wow, this is interesting. There must be somebody from there to actually see that. And the other way around, you have the same thing. Like there was a in my neighborhood in Texas, there was a little, counter demonstration to an ecumenical event by some right-wing party in the US, which had a sort of homegrown Al-Qaeda terrorist attack where somebody was shot in front. And only by that, it came out that Geert Wilders, the right-wing guy from the Netherlands, was actually present in the room. So there's definitely this kind of like interaction going on. And there's a similar thing going on as what Mike was saying. You typically, that's not something that is like blown up in the news. You have to have these like local sort of like observations to actually see what's going on. And I think part of the success of this sort of like takeover of sort of like broad swaths of population in many, many countries by the right wing is that they are internationally so organized with their simple messages, while the kind of stuff that would make that surface, like named entity recognition in news and machine translation, is just not there. So it seems almost like a kind of democratic obligation to make these tools better. But for that, they need to scale. And so is that something you have thought about? Like, how do you actually apply this beyond sort of like a book series, which is supremely interesting, don't get me wrong. But this must come to your mind at some point, isn't it?
Well, so I mean, the Babysitters Club is a fun, and I really do enjoy working on it. It's a fun front for infrastructure building, and I mean honestly, and once I've written these things, I can then point people to them for many different projects and contexts. And it's funny you mentioned that example. There's a project that I'm working on right now with one of the faculty members, Adrian Daub, who is writing a book on cancel culture as a like moral panic across Europe and the US. Where what we're doing is we're tracing things like the phrase cancel culture and the earlier political correctness and politically correct and various things related to gender, looking at them in French news and German news articles, and once we have that text, doing text analysis things on it, including identity recognition, to be like, how often are they freaking out about something happening in California versus something in their own like local context, like and also looking at things like phrases that are repeated, looking at like longer n-grams, things like that, looking at sort of some of the major like ideological figures and like how repetitive their text is, and literally the code that I was using for that is from Babysitters Club book 8. I have a version of that book that like extracts the like text comparison code, and I use it for all kinds of things. I've used it for another faculty member, Cécile Aldouy, has been looking at like right-wing rhetoric in France. And the lemmatization code that I used for the Babysitters Club, I use on right-wing rhetoric for French too. We use the text comparison algorithm for that too. I mean, I think thinking about, I think there's a lot to be gained in thinking through sort of like what domain-tuned NLP would look like. And obviously, like you can't tune for all things at all times, and getting something that would work better for like 90s Quebec translations of the Babysitters Club is not going to get you far in terms of looking at 2022 French right-wing rhetoric. But for projects that really need that and need some degree of accuracy on that at scale, I mean, I think it's getting easier and easier to feed it more training data that's sort of specific to a particular kind of type of language, and get something that at least has like some moderate degree of improvement over the frankly garbage that you get a lot of the time with it out of the box.
Yeah, thanks. I will actually continue with this Babysitters Club and the translation project, because I think it's very fascinating, and it's kind of like seems that it succeeds in a very interesting way to show the kind of like the discrepancy of the DH tools in different languages, kind of like how you can do better, I don't know, name entity recognition in one language and not in the other, and so on. So I'm just wondering, kind of like, do you think that this kind of like unequal share of different kinds of DH tools for different languages somehow steers also how DH is done in different countries or different languages? Because kind of I think that there are kind of like sometimes differences in ways DH is done, for instance, in the US and in Northern Europe. And I know that there is kind of like specific French language bubble, and then there are this huge Spanish bubble and so on. So kind of like, do you think that the tools and the access to certain tools also somehow influences what is being studied? Oh, well, of course, there is this question of access of data that is, of course, kind of like a major thing that affects. But what is the role of the tools? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I like that's a really good point, and I do wonder if, I mean, like it sort of had its kind of origins in Europe, or at least its sort of popularity. But I wonder if the kind of ongoing popularity of stylometry within Europe may actually be somewhat reflected sort of by the shortcomings of NLP tools. I mean, in the US, like, I mean, people know about stylometry, and some people do it sometimes, but like by and large, it's not nearly as big of a thing as kind of NLP based research. But with stylometry, I mean, literally you can count words, and like you can do that without any sort of language specific knowledge or model. And so you don't need good NER to be able to do like good stylometry. Whereas, yeah, I mean, to do some of the more complicated, NLP and things involving syntax. So yeah, thinking about a kind of like syntactically informed DH rather than like buckets of words. You need better tools. And I mean, there have been significant improvements in what is out there. Even in the 3 years that I've worked at Stanford, the first time I taught my non-English DH class, I teach this non-English DH class where everyone shows up with their own language, and then we work through the methods and what can and can't be done with those languages together. It is completely ridiculous in terms of class prep, because I basically have to do a class prep for every language, and we've had like 6 or 8 languages in the class sometimes, but it is worth it, and it's a really useful sort of like every 2 years survey of the state of things. Things have gotten a lot better. Portuguese has gotten a lot better. Japanese has gotten a lot better since the first time I taught it. But it's still, there's still a lot of work to be done. And happily, some of it is getting funding, and there's more awareness being raised too within computational linguistics circles. Emily Bender being one of the most famous, computational linguists who has coined, what I guess referred to as the Bender rule, which is always name the language you're working on, which sounds stupid, but like, no, actually everyone in the world does it except for English. Like, you're never going to like walk into a paper about like text similarity and be shocked to learn that like it's Chinese. Like, they will always say Chinese. And the Anglophone crowd should do the same thing. And that it's starting to get somewhere. The National Endowment for the Humanities in the US has funded a project that's just wrapping up on new languages for NLP that has been focused on training humanists to annotate texts and actually train spacey NLP pipelines for those languages. Our last workshop is God, I think it's like next week. Anyhow, there'll be videos that will be released on as part of Daria's education platform for how to do this stuff. So it's like progress is happening. David Bamman's multilingual book NLP covers I think 4 or 5 different languages. It's progress, but it's slow. But happily the tools are getting easier to sort of lower the barrier to entry for being able to make a dent on improving it for different languages.
Nice. I have another completely different question. So you mentioned this anecdote where you said you ended up in a HPC, high performance compute cluster center, where you ended up being the go-between the people who sort of like managed the cluster and the people who were faculty who had like snarky questions. And so in order to avoid the 3-word answer, you would sort of like broker in between. So I was sort of also very lucky in that sense, working for a database company in the 90s, and only much later, around 2011, I sort of realized that I was a go-between programmers, project developers who would put data into the project, users, and then I thought this was a triangle. And then I met somebody at the W3C who said, no, it's a tetrad. There's also people by the database who are completely different. It's not the same people as the users. And that was the first person I met who had the same sort of niche. He worked for a database company called Virtuoso. And so one of the interesting things is these people are sort of rare, but one meets them from time to time. And they typically, like yourself, sort of like slipped into it. But this is I think, very, very interesting niche to work in. Obviously, you acquire sort of some knowledge from these different corners of the world. I mean, the intellectual world. And it is also sometimes highly inspiring, even though it is stressful. Could you imagine, is this something you ever thought about, like what would be the curriculum? Like if somebody would be interested in doing that kind of stuff on purpose, what would they study?
On purpose, I love it. Yeah, I actually have a book chapter coming out about that exact topic. So during my time in HPC, I found a bunch of other weirdos who had also ended up in similar roles in various places. There was like 5 or 6 of us. And so we got together and had like Zoom calls every so often, and like we just talk about like, what are you doing? What weird things are you encountering? Like, can we work together on anything? And so in the upcoming Debates in DH computation volume, there is a chapter kind of collectively written by like 5 or 6 of us, talking about, sort of what this role is, the fact that it is increasingly, we hope and imagine, going to be needed, kind of as universities make big investments in HPC infrastructure. I can tell there was many hours of meetings at Berkeley talking about, like, from the vice chancellor of research being like, okay, I will give you these millions of dollars, but like, you've got to get as wide adoption as possible. Like, we want to see like everyone possible using this thing. So they were going out and sort of courting people who had never used this stuff before and who had new kinds of support needs, and we sort of talk about the kind of, as the situation repeats in different places, there's going to be a need for people with like humanities and social science sort of domain background and experience to be able to support these users. So we imagine and sort of hope that it is a growth area for kind of alt-ac employment, that is somewhat deliberate. And we talk about sort of the kinds of things that one might study. And I think having having a really solid grounding in the discipline that you're supporting, or adjacent disciplines, you know, getting into sort of like the humanities and social sciences like mindset, is fundamentally more important than the technical things that you can pick up to some extent or another. I mean, again, like I only really learned to code like through the Babysitters Club and other projects like after leaving Berkeley. But I still managed like, you know, a migration of like a new version of like, you know, Python and a new operating system like on the HPC cluster, you know, all updating all the modules and everything. So I mean, I think that disciplinary grounding, some ability to like deal with different kinds of people, and you know, then only like, you know, tertiarily or more the hardcore technical stuff. I mean, if I were to have stayed and pursued that more seriously, I think I would have needed to improve that somewhat. But I mean, there are lots of people who can help you write the code or debug the code. There are many fewer people who can translate a humanist question into something that like you could actually go about to help solve. I mean, it's the classic, one of my favorite words, you know, when consulting with humanists on projects is database. When someone says they have a database or they want a database, it could be anything. It could be a Word document with tables. It could be a notebook. I mean, it like literally, like, you know, like SQL is probably the least likely outcome when someone says they have a database. But figuring out, or they want a database, but figuring out like what the database is and how to get them what they need is really like this sort of intermediary role. And so, yeah, like learning to think like a humanist and like deal with people like a, you know, customer service and like manage projects like a project manager, are really like the core things, I guess.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for a super exciting talk. I was blown away, especially with your initiatives for Ukraine at the moment. I actually wanted to talk about one of the points you listed at the end of your talk as suggestion for further discussion, because I know you do also work with gender and other minorities in DH, and perhaps you could talk a bit about those projects as well.
Oh, so it's ironic. Like, you know, in 2019, we, you know, had the poster at DH 2019. I, you know, brought the skeleton to ACH 2019. We got the proposal in to ADHO to be a SIG. ADHO takes forever as usual. And I think they emailed me back in like April 2020 being like, congratulations, you're a SIG. Which literally could not have been a worse possible time. And it's one of those things where like I really like believe this is like very important work, but also and this is how it often sort of gets hijacked or put on the back burner. I also know that everyone else involved with it completely understands like why I can't do anything with it when like there is no childcare. And this is how it ended up on a very long hiatus. You know, and you know, it's sort of awkward because every year you're supposed to send in a report, like, you know, to ADHO being like, what did your SIG do? And the answer is nothing. There's a pandemic going on and I have young children and like not all of them can get vaccinated and like the schools are not necessarily open. So nothing. We have done nothing, like check the news, pandemic. And so that was the state for 2020. That was the state also for 2021. And literally last week for Day of DH, the night before Day of DH, I'm like, okay, that does it. Like, this is the day, like, we're gonna do something. We're gonna at least take a first step towards doing a thing because this is a thing that needs to happen and so forth. So I will stick a link in the chat. I have a survey is what I, you know, everything always has to be a Google Doc, a Google form, or a Google Sheet. That basically is how DH stuff happens or comes back into life. So reinvigorating this project is on my list of things that I want to do, am going to do. I have gotten a few responses to the survey for Day of DH. I will continue tweeting it and I will paste it here in the chat for you all. Basically it is the like, so here we are 2 years later, let's do some stuff. what do you need? What do you want to do? How are you feeling? Let's do things. Kind of survey. That's where that stands after 2 years of being dormant. Like, no, seriously, like let's get to doing things, and just trying to get a hold on like where everyone else is and what they need and what we can sort of think of doing going forward. So I still have Cheese, the skeleton. She hangs out in my textile makerspace, and yeah.
Nice. We have time for one last question. Where I go? Okay, so you want to say something?
I have already had 2 questions, so I'm.
You get a third one.
Okay, so this is my lucky day. So no, I just kind of like wanted to ask about this project Bamboo. You started with that, and you said that kind of like that it was something that's developing something that people did not want to, and I'm right now in a phase where I am, as part of my research, also starting to develop a kind of like web interface kind of thing. It's still in the very, very preliminary stage, but one of the major questions that are in my head right now is how to do it in a way that also other people might be interested in using that. So do you have some kind of like advice? What would you suggest me to do in this project so that it would be kind of like useful also for some other people?
Yeah, I mean, user interfaces in particular are hard and can be really hard to reuse. I mean, a lot of them are just like necessarily like tied very closely to a particular set of data and a particular set of questions. I mean, I think, you know, when it comes to projects, you know, and thinking about sustainability and reusability, I mean, the thing I often ask people is like, what is the thing that like you can imagine someone picking up and using? And usually, like, honestly, the interface is often what ends up being thrown out first. I mean, what persists, if you're lucky, is the data behind it. So making sure that there's some way to get the data out and that people can get the data out in a way that they want to reuse it is good. I mean, often when it comes to reusability with like interfaces, it's helpful to sort of like go one level more abstract. Like, realistically, probably no one's ever going to use like the exact code and like UI that you develop for things. But if you write something up about like the design decisions that went into it, what ended up working and not for users as part of user testing, you know, once you deployed it, what were the features that people were actually like making use of the way you wanted, and what were the things that like you were super excited about but like never actually got the uptake that you had hoped for, you know, based on sort of like web analytics. Like, those are the insights that like might be reusable and repurposable and like inform future projects that have to design similar interfaces. But I am not sure, like, other than things that are literally like creating like, you know, code widgets for like Python or something, I'm not sure I've ever actually seen like a UI successfully like reused in another context, like despite everyone's like best hopes and efforts.
Thanks.
There's this old joke that everybody wants standards, but everybody wants their own, like toothbrushes.
Toothbrushes, always.
Yes. So thank you very much. We have done 2 hours. That was awesome. I wish we could all hang out in like one place. I do the same thing I do every week. I will look to the future. So next week we will have Frank Schweitzer in person. Cultural data analytics, the bigger picture, documents, social networks, knowledge graphs. He's the chair of systems design at ETH Zurich. He has a PhD in physics and a PhD in philosophy on the aesthetics of Goethe, I think. And what's interesting about this whole thing is that now we have done another semester, and we have people from cultural evolution, network science, systems design, digital humanities, and everything in between. And what we want to sort of like make sure as, or sort of what we understand as the bigger picture of cultural analytics is an inclusive kind of picture of that, because cultural analytics needs all these different things. And in that sense, I'm very happy that you mentioned this sort of go-between at the compute center thing, because these people are the most important ones. And so with that, I would like to thank you again very much, and see you as soon as possible.
Here's to GH 2023.
Yes.
Yeah,
Fingers crossed.
And I like.
maybe we'll be there in person.
Yes.
I hope your project that you're currently spending most time on does not have to go on forever, but it's not necessary anymore. So,
Yep.
but thank you very much for doing everything you're doing.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
It was
Thank
awesome. Bye.
Hi, take care.
Thank you. Bye.